Hello, hi everyone. Thank you for being here. Let me just quickly introduce our speaker tonight. We're very happy to have Andrew Berman with us tonight. Andrew is a New York City-based architect who has worked on a wide range of projects and project types and scales for diverse public, institutional, and private clients, including multiple library and art space projects. Andrew Berman received a Bachelor of Arts from Yale College and a Master of Architecture degree from the Yale School of Architecture. Andrew worked in Osaka, in Chicago, and in New York City prior to opening his own office in New York in 1995. In 2010, he received the Architectural League's Emerging Voices Award, and in 2014, he was elected to the College of Fellows of the American Institute of Architects. Andrew has also received the Arts and Letters Award for Architecture from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and in 2018, he was invited to design a chapel for the Vatican for the Venice Architectural Biennale. As most of you know, Andrew and his team are working on the renovation of Crosby Hall. Please welcome Andrew Berman.
Thank you.
Switch it on.
Let's see. Is it working? Can you hear me? Great. Thank you very much, Julia. Thank you for coming this evening. Thank you, Professor Carter, Brian Carter, for introducing me to University of Buffalo. We're very happy, myself and some of our team, to be working with the university on Crosby, and look forward to talking to you about that in the future. Tonight I'm going to talk more about the past, but about things that we still think about in the present day. So I'm going to go over some of my work to give you an idea of what motivates and what we do. As Julia said, we have a small practice in Manhattan. There are 10 of us. So we are very design-based, but we do everything ourselves in-house. We take on the technical as well as the creative aspects and see it all as one. We're located downtown near the Brooklyn Bridge, near the World Trade Center, and in the what I like to think of the kind of gritty congestion of it all. And this is the studio building out of which we operate. It's a nice old cast iron building that's completely neglected. And I show it because this is the place from which we work, and I feel that place is really the underpinning of everything we do. Concerns with place inform who we are and how we like to work. The quotidian aspects of the city and of every place that we work really seem to become the most important once we become familiar with a place. And I selected this photo to kind of illustrate that. This, to my mind, is New York City in its truest. The grid of New York City is a remarkable entity, and it definitely permeates one's thinking and one's movement as one lives it and works within it. This is a collage by Saul Lewitt. Most of the city is built of buildings that are fairly anonymous. I mean, this building actually has a distinguished author, but nobody would know who it was. And I find that the strength of the city and the strength of most cities is actually built upon the designs of people who we don't know of anymore, and sometimes buildings that were just designed and made by teams of craftsmen. And it's very informing to me that architecture, I believe, is really underpinned by this, not by the singular authored structures that we tend to associate with capital A architecture. I always wish to work with a real spirit of place. Again, this is an image to me that is very much what New York is. It's in fact very similar to what I see when I look out my window. And architecture is about making space above everything else, and the space is is all around us. It's between buildings, it's between places, it's between walls, very often in New York. And this is a drawing by an artist, Robert Moskowitz, who lives in the neighborhood where we practice. And it's a drawing that captures the space between the towers, which was, the space between the towers was the beauty of the towers. Every day walking home from the studio and looking and seeing that sliver of sky was just the most beautiful thing. And it was such a lesson to me that the buildings disappeared. These buildings, which were so enormous, every evening disappeared because the sky was the beauty that they framed and presented. And so this was the first project I authored on my own. And it was a renovation of a derelict warehouse for a fashion photographer. And from the outside, all we showed was a 4-meter tall door and left everything else very much as is. In this project, wanted to really only do what was necessary to move a building from being completely disused to its new use. And it was a good first project for me because I saw how much we could do with so little in the end. And it's something I try to remember in all the work going forward. This is the interior, where we opened up the roof, let natural light become the atmosphere. This was the next project I did, which was an addition to a 300-year-old farmhouse. The farmhouse actually has the same form, same geometry, and I worked tirelessly to come up with a form and geometry that was not that of the farmhouse, and realized eventually that it was right. It was, for the climate, the location, and the scale, the house was perfect. And so I could work with that form going forward. And again, it was a very good lesson in learning how one needn't have to invent if there was something very strong there to work with. Another early project, which was on a very raw edge of Manhattan at the time, before a lot of recent development. And I was interested in the kind of anonymous and strange, awkward shapes of the revealed sides of buildings that occur when lots go empty. And view back to the city. So the first project I really want to show with some depth is the Center for Architecture, which was a competition in 2000 that I entered about 10 years out of school and slightly into solo practice. And I was just far enough from school that I was very aware of the absence of the energy and camaraderie of the studio and the friends and the kind of discussion that happens when you are with your crowd. And I was very aware of the kind of isolation and strains of working in a very small practice of one at that time. But I entered this competition because I wanted to really think about something interesting at that time, not with the intention or the thought of winning it. And it proved to be both a good thing to think about and something I won. The Center for Architecture, the AIA bought a property in Lower Manhattan. It was a somewhat unusable space. The AIA at that time was a back office organization. They had no meeting space, they had no public face, they had no place for their constituents. And so what they did was bought a ground floor space in a loft building, and they bought 2 basement levels below that, hoping to create a very public and alive venue for the discussion of the city, contemporary architecture, and professional practice. This was one of the images I created for the competition. This is a photograph of a model, just a simple snapshot of a model. And it's indicative of something I was really intent on, which for this project I want to show the architecture as a thought and not as a gesture and not as something really created by the architect, but just something very pure and quiet. And at that time I was thinking a lot about a New York artist who had passed away by then, named Gordon Matta Clark. He was trained as an architect, and I suppose was an architect, though he never built architecture as we tend to discuss it. But he made remarkable architecture, and he did it usually by reframing situations or buildings or cutting or opening structures. But he made very strong architecture, and it really was something that I was thinking a lot then, and I think I continue to think a lot about now. And so this is a section of what the Center for Architecture was. It was a ground floor space and two very low and completely dark and airless basement levels below that. And in my proposal, I removed floor slabs, concrete floor slabs and beams, to create an open section building and to take advantage of this window, which in fact is really the only window of this 15,000 square foot space. And so this one window facing the street had to become the light and the view for the entire building. This is it after completion, looking from LaGuardia Place in. A view in from the sidewalk. From the sidewalk, you can see all levels. So you can see the ground floor, second floor down, third floor down. The lecturer can look up and see the people on the street. It makes for a kind of lovely little urban theater. The open section. This is more or less the view from the lectern, so you can look up, see the street. Everything is exposed. As I said, it's really a very raw, very direct, very shoestring budget type project, but not a project of compromise. It was very clear intent, and I was very happy that not only did we got it and got it done, but it's been a great success, and we continue to this day to work with the AIA on tuning things, changing things. A lot's happened since this opened almost 16, 17 years ago. So we've been very fortunate to work with the New York Public Library now on a number of projects, and we're working with some other municipal libraries in New Jersey and Illinois as well. And the library typology is remarkable. The public library typology is remarkable. It's a very social, civic, as well as learning-based type of an institution. And the New York Public Library has been a wonderful client. They have 97 libraries in New York City. There are actually 207 branch libraries, neighborhood libraries in the city, but there are 3 library systems. But the New York Public Library is 97, and this project is one of them. This is out in Staten Island, which is here across New York Harbor. It's a lovely ferry ride from our studio, and it's very close to the waterfront. There used to be an enormous Navy installation here. There was a lot of heavy industry. There was a lot of breweries. There was a lot. And now there's not much at all. It's a really remarkably blighted, forgotten part of New York City. There's the 19th century park, which shows well in this photograph. There are lots of little stores like this around the park, and then our little library is on the park. These are some neighborhood houses. There's a lot of big housing projects. It's a part of New York that feels like it was forgotten by New York City, and we were very excited to be part of giving something back here. So this is the the library that was. It's a one-room library. It was built in 1907. It was part of the original Carnegie grant, which enormous number of libraries as well as other civic structures were built around the country and even internationally. This is what the interior looked like when we got to it. It was very cramped. The upper windows had all been plywooded over. A number of the base windows had been painted over. But fortunately, it hadn't been really desecrated. It had just been heavily used and encrusted. The New York Public Library bought this site adjacent to the original building and tasked us with making a much larger facility. And so we were able to more or less quadruple the size of the library. This is the plan with the original. The original was accessed through this podium and ceremonial stairs. And what we did was create an addition here, coming up the grade of the hill so we could have access via stairs or via the natural slope of the sidewalk. And in this project, we looked to really create open space, open, inviting space that became modulated for the various programmatic needs of the library. The original building is brick with wood interior lining and a wood roof structure. And what we did was design a building out of wood structure, as a way of making its own autonomous architecture, but a new architecture that very much knits in with the original architecture. This is the wood going up. This was all made in a shop in upstate New York. I won't go into the gory details, but this project and some of the other projects I'm showing are low bid city projects. They're kind of constructed under the most difficult conditions, funding and administrative conditions. And one of our strategies for navigating that was to design the structure so it could be built in a shop and built in that way very precisely under proper conditions of care and professionalism. And so it was delivered and quickly erected, and we got a good set of bones to work from. And this is it, completed. So the new entry is here. You can access it up the sidewalk or up the stairs. And the library, the new library, presents itself to the public as very open, very public, and warm. The original library is charming, but as you can see from here, you can't see into it. You can't see your neighbor. You don't know what's going on. The detail of the glass and the structure. And a view of the interior. It's full of natural light. You have open sight lines. There are no walls per se, and the books line the space. The library is always full. It's essentially a community center with resources of both analog and digital, a lot of continuing education, a lot of English as a second language. We really wanted to make something insistently and very vibrantly public. It's full of teens, of course, who are on the computers. But the computers and the books get equal billing. And this is something that we're always thinking about in library design, how to weave the digital and the analog together. And I think there's a common assumption that digital is superseding analog, but it's not that at all. It's just socketing in and vying for attention span. And the books we found here are lending at a much higher rate than they were beforehand. So part of that is because we've made them well presented. They're there. There's a central core in the building, which creates the spaces around it. It also houses a community room in the center. It has all the mechanical systems inside of it and staff areas inside of it. So we kind of accommodated all of the difficulties of a building within this volume to allow the space around it to be unencumbered. That's the community room. And a view out, you can see how the street is sloping there. So the building really describes the section of the site, makes it quite apparent. And one of the nice outcomes of this project was we were able to turn over the original Carnegie Library to the children. So we returned it to a one-room experience. It's not encumbered by too much. And for the children, it's a very grand and actually a very pure library space. And a view in. So ultimately, this project had a lot of programmatic and functional needs, but the biggest need I thought going into it and certainly coming out of it was to create something that felt like it was specially made for this place that had no expectations that they were ever going to get anything other than the one-room library that they had. And it turned out to be a very satisfying experience in that it's very well used and very well appreciated. So this next project I'm going to show is an art space. This is for MoMA PS1. MoMA PS1, MoMA is Museum of Modern Art, which is based in Manhattan. PS1 is a contemporary art venue in Long Island City, which is out here in Queens. And PS1 started in 1976 as a kind of rogue modern art venue in a abandoned school, PS1, public school number 1. By the time we were hired to work on PS1, they were in a courting process with the Museum of Modern Art, and eventually the Museum of Modern Art took over PS1. So now they are joined entities, but PS1 continues as the most contemporary front of their art display. It's in a very raucous neighborhood. There's a lot of transportation. This is subway. There are a lot of overhead train tracks, as well as highways, subways. There used to be a lot of industry. It's changing towards residential. And this is the museum as it was when we got to it. That's the old school. It's a big old school. It was built in 1885. And it was surrounded by these concrete walls, which are beautiful and wonderful. But experience showed that people visiting this museum would get there and tend to just walk around the concrete walls and walk around the block until they found a back door and knocked on it. So there was a problem with entry, and there was a problem with identity. And we were hired in large part to work that out. So here you can see the entry point to the site. The site is this whole block, but the museum is here, this U-shaped structure here. And what we did was create an independent building here, which brings one into the site and then discharges the visitors back to the courtyard, and then one is firmly within the boundaries of PS1 and ready for the visit. It's a drawing we did in the process, and a study model in the process. So again, you can see here, this is the entry we made, and then one enters this courtyard, walks across the courtyard and up into the museum. Another series of models that we made and collaged in various elements. We tend to work a lot in models, physical models, being an excellent way to study not just daylight, but proportion and scale. This is a drawing that shows the walls, the roof structure, which is concrete, and then these door elements that we designed, which are steel and glass. So the only material is concrete, aside from the steel and the glass. They come together and look like this. The doors are monumental. These are the doors to enter by. They're 12 feet tall. And then these side doors open so that when PS1 goes from its few art visitors per hour state on a Thursday to on a Saturday when there's 400 people coming to an event, they just can open up the whole thing and it just becomes a sluice gate. The light is really the experience of what we made, and the light leads you in towards the courtyard and towards the museum. And the light tracks through these skylights and is always changing in both color and angle. It's a landscape of geometry, and it was something I wanted to really focus on in our work and try to, by doing it in our work, extend the focus to the greater geometry of that landscape. Speaking back to my comment about the grid, this area is an incredibly confusing part of New York City because they're diagonals. It's a gridded area, and then these diagonals just slice through it. Old vestiges of the rails and the infrastructure, and it becomes very dynamic, very exciting. Detail. And the concrete walls have holes in them, of course, for the ties, and we inserted glass rods, polished glass rods into these, which became little portals of light and windows in these massive walls. You can see those in the wall. Next project is also an art space. This is very close to PS1. It's about a 10-minute walk away in an even rawer part of Long Island City. This is right around the corner. So there's just a lot of this great industrial scale infrastructure. And this was our site, this building, and this lot, this empty lot next to it. So this building was built in 1908. It was built to service locomotives, and as such, train tracks went into the building and locomotives could go inside the Great Hall. The building's essentially one big space. And when we were hired, it had already been lightly converted into an art space, but very lightly converted. And they were ready to take on the next level of making it a proper venue for art, and also wanting very much to activate the space by bringing the basement level into the art experience. There wasn't an elevator, and there were no legal staircases, so the basement was off limits. So this was the existing plan when we got there, and then we built this addition here in this empty lot. And as such, we extended the building, and we added all the program that wasn't. Entryway, orientation, a little bookshop, proper bathrooms, and vertical circulation. And in that way, we got to kind of enliven the whole wonderful art space that was there. We came up with an approach in which we built our building out of Court 10, and then ran that Court 10 behind the masonry wall of the existing. And then that Court 10 would open in the morning when it was opening to the public. And this is what it looks like. So the new entry is here. The materials are Court 10 and other very direct construction materials. Everything is very frankly presented and exposed. That's a view looking across the first courtyard into the interior and out to another courtyard. One of the things we were really concentrating on in this project was to make all of the space available for art. And as it turns out, this is how it's used. Artists are completely reimagining and repurposing all the spaces, including stairwells and elevator, for installations. This is the basement level, which we made accessible by virtue of this addition. And this was taken along the seam between the new, which is on the left, and the old, which is on the right. And looking from the old back to the new. So this was cut with a saw, a masonry saw, the blade that was about 4 feet in diameter. It's an amazing thing to see that sliced. And the space with the video installation, the space is completely reimagined with every installation. The artist, it's often very site-specific what is made for the space. So you could go from that, and to other extremes from exhibit to exhibit. It's a little bookshop. And natural light, again, was very important here. So you see a skylight that we created over the seat. And this is in the basement. So the basement is this almost like an archaeology of fallen industry. The remarkable brick and slate and porcelain components that were all part of this high voltage electrical system that was there to support the work on the locomotives when it was originally a locomotive shop. And all of that's still intact, and it all makes for a really great setting for the display of contemporary art, actually. There are a number of these vaulted spaces running underneath the building, and then they're used for performance and other artist-directed installations. We designed these doors, enormous doors on the outside. So trains don't drive in anymore, but trucks do, so that the work can be brought in and out and large-scale installations can happen. So something that was special about this project for us was it was really a good example of how doing something new to something old can completely re-present the old. And relatively, our project here was relatively small compared to the size of the new, and yet it had a complete transformational quality on the whole site, of the old building. So this next commission is for a sculptor, contemporary sculptor. This is in Brooklyn, in a industrial zone. It's a zone that's still actually industrial. It's one of the few. And so this is a view from the street, and this is a view from the roof of the building. So you can see the East River, power plant, World Trade Center. And this is the site from here to here. So it's a combination of 4 lots with a unheated warehouse on the lot. And our client is a sculptor who sculpts in a workshop manner. He has a team of 16 or so people. And he works, it's hard to describe his work. It is a hybrid of precedent and abstraction. It is generally in stone, though he works in metal. It's very inspired by classical and Renaissance precedents. But it's using a lot of very advanced technology. And so his studio needs were a very complex workflow that we got to work out with him. Until he built this, his sculpture was made in many different places and brought together in the end in Brooklyn. But it was made in Jersey, in Connecticut, in Italy, a lot in Italy, and so he was basically moving around to make his sculptures rather than the sculptures being in one place and him being able to work on them. So he starts with a block of stone, which this is onyx. The blocks start at 20 tons, so it's huge. It's industrial scale, and then the first act is usually the slicing with the Pellegrini saw. And then it goes from a lathe to a water jet, often. All of this, of course, coming from a modified digital file. And then it goes into hundreds, he says thousands of hours of handwork to get it to this point. And a photograph doesn't do the work justice. These sculptures are actually quite visually remarkable. And the stone is just, it's almost breathing in its vibrancy. So this is the original site with the original warehouse, and this is what we made. And like I said, we really, the fun of this project was trying to imagine what the workflow was, how the trucks would come in, drop the stone, there'd be a crane, it would bring the stone into this big space, there'd be a saw, it would go from the saw to the lathe, then go into various rooms for various degrees of cleaning and processing, and ultimately become a highly finished piece of sculpture which would be photographed in this studio. This is a view of what we made, looking through the courtyard before any stone was loaded in. These doors are 16 feet tall. They were sized to allow in the tallest tractor trailer truck that would deliver. The interior. There's a crane here. You see, there's one man here working on the stone. So it goes from the Pellegrini, this giant saw, eventually to one person. Or in this case, 3. You see 1, 2, 3 people working on this sculpture. Day in, day out, using little dental tools. We're very concerned with making good light so that the material could be seen in its best state. An overview and a street view at night. So there was something anachronistic about this project. Even if it's all about a new technology, it's also about an old craft. It's in a area zoned for manufacturing, and it felt quite special to be making a building for manufacturing in New York City. I mean, New York City for the last several generations has been an evacuation of manufacturing, and this is by no means a large-scale manufacturing plant, but it is a committed place to make, and make with quality. And as you can see, there was a wish to even exhibit some of the energy of the studio back to the public way here, so one can see in the evening. So from that studio to a writing studio, this was a wonderful project working with one client out in a beach community on Long Island. And this client is an architectural historian who writes daily. She gets up early, she walks to her studio, she writes, and at 1 o'clock she stops. And that's her daily routine, and that's how the building was kind of discussed and made. As we were talking about the project, we walked the site a lot together, and one of the thoughts that developed was that there was a special place up off the ground in the trees. And as such, I did this drawing to start to think about how to make a building about getting up to that special place. This was a model that we made and montaged. Another model. And then the building itself. The building is sitting kind of nestled into the woods. We set it very far back on the site so that the site itself could really be treated more like an open park, a nice parkland. And the building, depending on the light, disappears into the trees or sometimes comes forward from the trees. Whereas you can see in this photo, actually it does both. One plane comes forward. So this is the form. There's a tall door. There are really 3 openings: a tall door, a broad window facing west, and a long skylight. And the building was designed with these steel portal frames being the structure. Like the library project, I wanted to create a way of building this in a nice controlled manner using the abilities of the local people. The carpenter who built this had no idea what he was actually doing in terms of what was coming, but he knew very much how to make a building on his terms. He was actually great. And so together we kind of figured it out. And I figured out the parts he couldn't imagine, and he brought a lot to figuring out the framing that he could imagine. Oops. Now it was clad completely in copper. And these are 3 photographs showing the incremental layering in of the structure. So it was a combination of local shop-built steel and then site-built, stick-built building. And so the studio is up here in the trees. This was a drawing we made to figure out the panelization of the copper. And the very beginning of the project, as soon as I got an agreement that copper was the right material, we bought the copper as just big coils of copper. Copper is a volatile commodity, and it looked like it was getting more expensive, so we just bought it, committed early. This is copper. It's a great thing. No second guessing. Here's the building. So the door is 12 feet tall. So a person's only this tall. There's a real scale shift that goes on here. The stairs up, and then the studio. The studio is completely lit by this zenithal light, and the ceiling becomes a kind of sky dome, and it's just the way I thought about it and the way it actually worked out was the interior experience is like experiencing the light of the day, but without the distraction of everything around you. It's just a very pure feeling of light. And on a cloudy day, it's kind of wonderfully bright, and you can feel the color shifts during different times of year. You can feel the color shifts different times of day. And as such, it becomes a very active interior, and I think a very nice counterpoint to the very solitary and structured working method of my client. And a view out, and a view of the cantilever and the trees. So I'm going to go quickly through two residences here. This is on Long Island. This was a commission for a residence for a client for whom I had designed 2 lofts in New York City. She's from South Africa. Her parents and her brother and his family live in London. All their friends are scattered around the world because they all lived in South Africa and then left at a certain point. And so this house was very much thought of as a multi-generational house where everybody comes together. And so the task at hand was how to make something very big that also felt very comfortable, something that Lisa and her 2 kids could feel comfortable in, or Lisa, her 2 kids, and 12 other guests could feel comfortable in. And the house is designed in a way I thought about to make all the spaces around the house become exterior rooms. They spend most of the time there during the summer and spring months, and so in that way, it's a way of encouraging the utilization of the property and an experience of the outdoors. This is the entry court, parking, and the facade that's presented is a translucent glass facade. And one comes up some steps and can walk into the front door, and once through the door, see the water beyond. The house is built out of Douglas fir. This is all Douglas fir, and the perimeter walls are cast-in-place concrete. So it's a very kind of precise exercise in both casting concrete and then designing the timber so it could sit within the concrete shell. And then coming upstairs, it's a very bright, daylit upstairs. The kitchen is right at the geographical and emotional center of the house. And then this is the outdoor patio where all the meals are taken if it's not raining. And this is the west-facing patio, the pool, obviously, and there's a view to the water here. So something that was, a lovely aspect of this project was I knew the client very well from having done several projects for her, and I got to know her family very well. And one of the striking things to me was they lived in this nostalgic state for the South African life that they lived and then left. And it was a beautiful place by all accounts. I've not been to South Africa, but they said they spent every day outside. It was, the temperature was lovely. They had a garden, and so there was a lot of thought put into how to create spaces that started to offer that kind of level of comfort and quality. You can see here the concrete and then the wood boxes above it. It's all designed out on a 4-inch module. You can see the concrete and the wood. And as you come in closer, there's a lot of wonderful texture. We had the wood sandblasted, so the formwork really cast nicely. It's the detail of the corner. And then the roof is planted. The house benefits from a green roof, from a geothermal system, and maybe more than anything else from just a good siding, very good shading and good cross ventilation. So it's a very kind of sustainable house, albeit big house. And view at night. Now this next project is a residence in Maine on a very different kind of waterfront site. This is the site here. It's looking southwest. It's Camden, the Camden Hills out there. It's on an island, a lovely island that has 600 year-round residents on it. The island's the size of Manhattan, so it's Manhattan and this island the same size, 600 people versus, I think it's about 1.3 million, 1.4 million. So it's incredibly different density and cultural situation. And the weather here is remarkably variable, as is the light. And these are photographs from the site. Beautiful range of plant material and rock formations, textures and colors. And it was this, the kind of specifics of the site that really were the kind of impetus for the architectural thinking here. So the site is this site. It's a bit of a peninsula, and we designed a main house for the family, a boathouse, a dock, and a little studio. It's approached by water here. So this is coming into the dock. It's the house. It's interesting to think about designing a building that's approached by water more than it's approached by land. It just kind of inverts any kind of typical expectations we have. The car is very second tier here. There are cars, but it's really a more a boat experience. This is the land approach across a meadow. The house sits on a crest. Materials were all selected to play very well with the local color and texture, the very local color and texture. We clad it in shingles and copper. We very much used the vernacular. Had a remarkable building experience up here, just remarkable carpenters, tradesmen, incredibly committed. And I think a lot of it was bolstered by the fact that there's still a boat making craft up there, and a lot of people have trained in that, or perhaps do seasonal work in boat building. And so there's great skill and great appreciation for making. The building has all these little patios and cutouts that address prevailing both views and winds, more importantly. The winds are, even during the summer, the winds can make it too cold to sit outside, but with the right bit of protection, one can really spend a lot of the day outside, if not the whole day. And then the interior is illuminated from above. And the interior is very much an experience of traversing the natural landscape in a built form. The house follows the section of the landscape. We're able to make this very eccentric fireplace. Had this wonderful experience. It was this great kind of analog and digital experience back and forth of figuring out how to make this shape and then how to draw it so that the mason could follow very specifically where to put each brick. And then there's the boathouse here. This is the water. You can see the edge of a dock. The boathouse is on this little bit of meadow, and the meadow carries up onto the roof of the boathouse. That's what you see when you come off the dock. And then the doors can be opened up. So in the winter, it's full of gear, and it's for storage. In the summer, it can be just a great fun space. And then this little studio. Which has a nice view. So this architecture was very much about trying to make a direct connection with place, both in the sense of how it was made, but also more, and perhaps more importantly, in the experience of the place, and really to bring focus on the ephemeral qualities of light, wind, and weather. So the last project I'm going to show is this chapel for San Giorgio. This was built last spring in Venice. It was part of the Venice Biennale, the Architectural Biennale 2018. And it was a commission that came from the Vatican. The Vatican, for the first time, decided to participate in the Biennale, and they commissioned 10 architects from 10 different countries from around the world to design these chapels on the island of San Giorgio. And very interestingly, the invitation came, and then the direction came, and the direction was just about a sentence long, saying that they wanted a chapel. It had to be no bigger than such and such. And that was it, really. I kept waiting for more. And I kept wondering why. I'm not Catholic. I have no connection to the Vatican. And so the whole thing seemed like it was a very unexpected opportunity. And it was a remarkable opportunity because it was really an opportunity to think about a very pure situation. And a very pure architectural condition. So it's on San Giorgio, which is this island. This is San Marco, Piazza San Marco. So it's right across. And the island of San Giorgio is dominated by the Church of San Giorgio, which was designed by Andrea Palladio. It's a beautiful building. It's a gleaming the interior is a gleaming white space. And when you walk into it, it just feels like a remarkably modern space, which obviously it was when he built it. That's what was his intent, and it still has it all these years later. Also on the island, there is a small marina, a commercial marina, and there's a foundation called the Cheney Foundation, which is a not-for-profit that has a remarkable library and art collection, and parts of it were designed by Palladio as well. And the rest of the island is this park, which had been abandoned about 40 years ago and was no longer accessible to anybody and was not maintained as well. There's an abandoned amphitheater, which is still off limits. But for the purposes of the Biennale, the Vatican took on restoring this part of the park and a pathway to get there. And so the project itself is the creation of these 10 pavilions, but in a sense, the larger project was to create a relatively large park for Venice, a park where nobody could remember that there once was a park. So we were one of 10, as I said, and it was a very big range of architects, different size offices, different cultures. It's very interesting to see the work in contrast. And for this project, I started very much with the thought of place. Some sketches I did while visiting, and just thinking about the experience of place being the beginning of a focused and emotional experience through the chapel. And that, of course, spirals into studies. And one of the things we lodged onto very early was a wish to make this a very simple structure, a very humble structure, and a building that was by no accounts religious in any explicit way. There's a ink study of the geometry of the building and some physical models of the building. The plan. There's a large porch. There's a long bench. And then there's a bench for one. Model. I wanted very much to design this with a minimum amount of material and means, all with a kind of explicit modesty. So here's the components. It's clad in polycarbonate, it's framed in timber, it has a plywood interior, and that's it. That's the section. And that's the building in its site. It's just tucked within the trees. These are marine pines. It's all built on little pilings that were drilled into the ground. So the architecture here engages with the site by contrast. The quality of the sheathing and the bark of the tree are incredibly different. Chapel has this deep, the whole facade is a deep porch. And a bench. The interior is absolutely dark, except for this light that washes through the roof plane. And the dark interior is contrasted with this very bright exterior that makes a place of congregation, to look out to the lagoon. And as such, it's a very social space. It's very personal and quiet on the inside, but the outside, this is a place where people sit down next to each other and say, "What are you doing here?" It was great fun to, of course, not just to do this, but to see it used and to hear the various comments. And this is the chapel in its setting. So it looks out to this wonderful lagoon. So these chapels now, they were commissioned as temporary structures. We were told that they were going to be relocated to potential locations in central Italy where there had been earthquakes and damage. But as it turns out, this all worked out, I think, better than anybody expected. And there's now a legal process underway to make these permanent structures. So hopefully, if you're ever in Venice, you can go out there and definitely see the church by Palladio, and then if you have time, go see the chapels. So I'd like to conclude, this is the last slide, but I'd like to conclude with a thought that, that really underpins all the work, and it's just been getting more defined and more honed in my mind as I practice, which is that the work we do is really about trying to situate ourselves and our users, our clients, or the using public, in environments that are resistant to this very rapid, relentless slide towards commercialization, globalization, digitization, and all of these things are not in and of themselves bad things. But what they are collectively, I feel, is very much a slide towards placelessness, a slide towards sameness, so that one place tends to feel like another place, one building tends to look like another building, and the specifics of life, the light, the weather, the people you're with, start to get a bit lost in that kind of relentless slide. And I think that it's very much something through architecture that we can address, not in a nostalgic way and not in a fraught way, but in a positive way, by making places that feel like they belong where they are, made how they should be made, and for really, truly for the purposes for which they were commissioned. And in that way, I hope that our architecture, the work that we're making, is going to be long-lasting and relevant. It might be very quiet, but one thing we discover is people feel perhaps before they see, and the comments we get from people, especially say in the libraries, is very positive and very telling. People have no vocabulary for architecture and criticism, can tell you exactly why it's a good space for them or not. And this has been a wonderful lesson of practice, to hear that the best critics are the people who don't have the training, but they have the feeling. And so there's a long way to say that these are concerns behind our work, and this chapel was just the most recent one. We're fortunate now to be working on a number of public libraries, which continue an opportunity to investigate all these ideas. And we're incredibly excited about working on Crosby Hall for a number of reasons. To work on a building that has a great pedigree, such as it does, and has lovely proportions, in a very, I think, frank and smart way it was made, is wonderful. And to, of course, work for an architectural community is a very exciting thing. We in the studio are a very committed group to architecture, and we talk a lot about those days in studio when everything kind of first came together for us as architects. And it's very nice to be talking now about trying to make space for that future for the university. So with that, I want to say thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Andrew has agreed to take questions. If anybody has any questions, please do speak up. Raise your hands. Kelly B.
Hi, Andrew.
Hi, how are you, Kelly?
Very well, thanks. That was a great presentation.
Thank you.
What resonated with me about your presentation was that you talked a lot about everyday architecture and craft. And I like the way you closed, where you talked about sense of place. I'm just curious if you feel that the building industry in general has lost its sense of craft, because you talked a lot also about you clearly have a relationship with the people who actually make your spaces, which I don't always find. So that's one question, I guess, and a follow-up to that is, do you think that there's an element of scale to where that may be prohibitive or at least diminished, the sense of craft?
Yes. Well, first, we definitely have a very engaged relationship with the people who make our projects, both very much the clients, very much the consultant team, and then very much the trades. And I've had experiences at both ends of the spectrum and lots in between, from remarkable building experiences, like the Maine project was just thrilling to me, that these fellas showed up in a boat every morning in the dark and worked all day in the dark until the dark, and they knew exactly what they were doing, and no matter how bad the weather was, nobody griped, and they just brought so much to it. And there have been in different projects other instances of that at a very high level, and then there have been some of these projects were built under great duress, with a lot of disappointment. And one of the things we talk a lot about in the studio is how are we going to design realistically for the situation at hand, knowing full well that we're not always going to get an ideal or even an enthusiastic building partner, but we're still going to have to get it built. And so we try to understand what's coming, what can we control, and how can we control it. So I pointed out at the public library the use of the glue laminated timbers as one part of a strategy to have some control and to try to make an impact in a way that we thought would resonate to the bigger building. To your other question about do I see change? I see a lot of change, yeah. And I feel there's a very consistent, insistent pushing of the construction trades towards a manufacturing industry, and more of what we see are people who are familiar with putting together manufactured assemblies, and that leads to a very clean separation between trades, rather than people talking a lot together and figuring out how to, what goes first in order so the seventh thing can come in. It's more, we bring one thing, install it, somebody else comes, installs it, and there's the communication is very difficult to maintain, and the connection between the people who are responsible for the trade and the actual making of it is often very disconnected, because they're really more installing something that came from afar rather than making it themselves, based upon a long lifetime of learning on the job. So this is happening. It's definitely happening. We still fortunately can find people who can do otherwise, but I think it's up to us as architects to certainly resist where we can have an impact, but we also have to be very realistic about what is out there and how we're going to work. We have clients, they have budgets, they have schedules, and we still have the same responsibility at the end of the day. And so we have to be knowing about what's coming and figure out a way to leverage something very positive from it.
I was very interested in what you showed regarding libraries. I've recently been looking at public library design for an article, and so I'm curious what you would recommend reading in terms of the current, what you think is the current state of best thinking or best practice in public library design, or exemplary projects that people should take a look at.
Huh. That's a good question. Dan, if you have any thoughts, I'm drawing a bit of a blank. I'll tell you, as I think about the specific answer, one thing I keep looking at in terms of libraries are great precedent libraries, great old libraries. Because I think at the end of the day, the biggest challenge for libraries is to make quality social space, civic space, inspiring space that people want to spend long periods of time in, not just transactional bits of time. And there's a lot of great examples of that in traditional architecture. I mean, Le Proust. There are two libraries in Paris you walk into and your heart just like freezes up. It's so remarkable. And in a way, these libraries are just as appropriate for today as they were when they were designed. What's changed is, what I'm finding is changing is that there's just such a remarkable diversity now of expectations and uses. A library used to be that you walked in, it was a reverential space, you sat in your place, you read the book that was brought to you, and then you said thank you and you left. It was very static and prescribed. And today, the public libraries seem to want to take people on their own terms, and that is everything. You know, whether you're there to read in silence or you're there to eat and do a WebEx or a FaceTime, they're going to take you either way. And there are people come, of course, still for books, but people are there for digital or for classes. A lot of learning is going on. I think the libraries are taking over for what people didn't get at school. So there's a lot of adult education. There's a lot of education for immigrants and transitioning for immigrants. And so the demands functionally are very complicated in a way that the earlier libraries weren't, but the need for these inspiring spaces is still the same. And I think the need for spaces that really feel civic and are clearly for all of us is at the root. And I think it's a lost opportunity when one sees a new contemporary library that ticks off all the boxes of need, but still feels more like it's part of a shopping mall or a retail environment than it's an inspiring public civic space. And beyond that, I'll try to think of actual reading, because nothing's coming to mind right now. But there is plenty to read, and there are a lot of good examples of contemporary library design.
Thank you very much for your talk. And I just want to let you know, a few of us were in Venice this summer with 15 students, and we got to visit your Vatican chapel. So it's nice to hear more about it, and it's a great little project.
Thanks.
I just, one thing I appreciated about your lecture was, you showed us a nice range of projects that, while you showed us a couple of houses for very seemingly wealthy clients, you also showed us a lot of projects that seem to do a lot on a much more modest budget and even scale. And so I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about your approach when a project is on the kind of modest or trim side, and what kind of things you immediately prioritize in that work.
Right. You're right. There's a big range, and in a way I'm reluctant to even show the houses because they skew so they're big undertakings, but they were well supported for all the right reasons, and as such, it's a good architectural endeavor. Something I thought about very clearly from day one of practice was that every job I was going to do, there had to have been a way to make something happen. It wasn't just going to be, we're going to make a bathroom. It was going to be, we'll make a bathroom and there'd be some spark, in that $2,000 budget that would make this special for the client and make it a growing experience for me as an architect. And I'm lucky that I thought that to myself at the day one, and I still think it, because you go through a lot of projects that are incredibly challenged, and not just because of budget, but because of lots of circumstances, right? Where architects are juggling a remarkable range of pressures. And so the first thing is to work with this feeling that I have to be able to leverage something special here. And then from that, there's also been a consistent thought that much of the inspiration comes from the place and from the people. And so I try very much to walk into each project without preconceptions, without an idea of where it's going to go, but rather to be very receptive to what I'm going to hear when I meet, learn, talk, and what we're going to find as we get to know a place. And yeah, once you're there, there's something can happen. There's always an opportunity. So I hope that answers your question properly.
Hi, Andrew. Am I allowed to ask you about Crosby Hall?
You can.
Not in deeply.
Yeah.
My question is about the scope of the work. You have with the SUNY Foundation or the dormitory authority, whoever your paying client is. My concern, I really, first of all, really a great lecture. Very moving, very poetic. And I was particularly impressed with your consistent strategy of, bringing inside outside virtually. Even industrial section of Greenpoint in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was, really well done with respect to, how enclosed industrial space can be opened up to the street. Having taught here for a long time, I really like Crosby Hall in terms of the architecture, but it always troubles me. The building just stops, and then there's a kind of leftover space, if you will, which now is handicap parking and trash area. I'm wondering if you have power to persuade your client to open up, exterior space, so this become really a nice courtyard. You are not seeing, the this wonderful marronnier, the horse chestnut woods. When I was here, there's about 30 trees with maybe 100 squirrels nesting in all the trees. There's only 3 left. Squirrels I saw today. Okay, poor thing. I think this might be a great opportunity to bring this nature back.
Yeah.
Kind of historical courtyard, because building stops, and then exterior.
Right.
And so I was wondering whether that is, you might like to tell us a little bit about your strategy.
We're in the concept phase, so we're just trying now to understand with the client what the program opportunities are and what the qualities of the building are and how they can come together. And so we're working through different iterations of plans to do that. I think that the concerns that I tried to articulate here are going to be all concerns that I will continue to try to bring here, and the quality that we strive for in our work is quality that we're going to strive for there, and the care, the care of design, the care of execution. So that I'm confident in, and I feel that the project itself it's probably much like many of the projects on a campus. It's a catalytic project. And if it's done well, it begs the next project, right? So if this project doesn't include the landscape, if it's done well, that landscape's going to have to get done, right? As you improve one thing, everything else becomes in need as well. And so I think Crosby it's clearly a commitment from the university to take on a major improvement in a sensitive way. And I can only imagine that if not through this project explicitly, eventually it kind of ripples out to the greater landscape. You're welcome.
Thank you, Andrew. I think the Crosby question was inevitable, so of course. Thank you very much for your talk.
You're
we really
welcome.
appreciate it.
Thank you.